you, sir. I could wait and play the game, but I think that we need to put our, if I may use the footballing terms, we need to put our foot on the ball here a little and recognise what we're actually doing here. Let's bring this debate back to the sort of level it should be at in this assembly, which is about the proposition, the wording, the implications, and what we're actually trying to do as an assembly, and what I am actually trying to do as Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, something added to the remit, which I will bring up from the beginning. So there are a couple of things I will start with, because I've got a melange of speeches here, because I wasn't expecting the amendment to be withdrawn in this way. And I apologise to members for not circulating the comments paper on the original proposition, which is here, because I didn't think we'd be debating the original proposition. So I recirculated what is the relevant comments paper, because it's unusual for a member to remove their own amendment to their proposition at the last minute, and so I do apologise for members that we could not circulate that, but I will try to explain as much as possible. I will also try to keep your attention at the end of a long day, which is going to be a challenge, but so I've done that for 25 years, we'll try it again. So one of the things that I must mention is conversations I've had with officers in terms of the demands that have been made through propositions that are coming. And so when speaking to officers and working on P12, the last amendment that was brought to direct education for me, and I paraphrase, a review of the relevant laws outlining ministerial obligations and powers related to post-16 education has commenced. However, this work has been paused to prioritise the commitments made following adoption of P1224, in which Deputy Gardner committed me to review several elements of the law governing entitlement financial support for higher education. While the review of education law is temporarily paused, it is important to note that at an operational level, work is still underway in this area. Specifically, Skills Jersey are diligently enhancing existing wraparound services for early intervention with a focus on students at the risk of disengagement. This aligns with the goals of the future policy work related to the age of participation, specifically by providing support and encouragement to students to remain in education. So an enormous amount is going on, trying to balance the directional propositions that are coming forward. And I recognise that there were things brought to the last Council of Ministers by the Minister that were simply not accepted around apprentice funding. So the last Council of Ministers rejected those. I'm having to look at these issues myself. However, there is one difference, and that is the fact that I do have a strong commitment to education. I care enormously about every single child that we teach. And so I will rise above comments which I might consider to be slightly personal and ill-informed. But we, sir, in leadership, one has to take that on board and one has to lead the way, not follow. So I would ask members to reject this for many reasons. I will start by making clear that simply making some amendments would be tinkering with the fundamentally forward position and would make for bad decision making. That's why the decision to reject the amendment was taken. And so I will say that I went to Council of Ministers regarding the amendment to say that we can probably accept it, it's not doing anything. And I was somewhat hoisted by my own petard by certain members who suggested that, before I have said we should not be accepting amendments that do nothing just for the sake of accepting an amendment and making things easier. And so I agreed with that. So what I've demonstrated, sure, in my leadership, I'm willing to change those simple things with unity. And so what was nice was to have the support and the confidence around the Council of Ministers. I did email the Deputy and ask her to have that same confidence in me. That's obviously not there, but I hope that in the next few months and year or so, I can gain that confidence from the Deputy and those who will probably speak to undermine that confidence today. And I really will work hard to do that. So Part A of the proposition does state that all 16 to 19-year-olds should be eligible for fully funded educational professional training in Jersey, and to request myself to implement any necessary changes to the existing provision prior to September 2025. Let's talk about the details now. This creates huge ambiguity in who all 16 to 18-year-olds refer to. The debate we've gone through, which got somewhat farcical at times, so when everyone having to declare that they have a child. So I have two children that are older than that, so I should declare that they might feel left out. I love them dearly, sir. As indeed, sir, I love my wife. So I've now got her into Hansard, as Tepley Coles did. So that's another one ticked off the box. But in addition, sir, the word prior to September 25 leads to serious issues, and let's start. The timescale is unrealistic. 3 months to implement for the academic year 2024, because anything prior to 2025 will have to start at the beginning of the previous academic year. That's the way schools work, sir, and I have a huge knowledge of the way schools work. Funding issues. I have inherited funding from the last government plan where money for this change was not included. Indeed, sir, I believe that bids for this were refused twice from the last Council of Ministers. To implement any change prior to 2025 raises the question of which service should monies be diverted from. And we could be putting money into education that already exists and is running absolutely effectively, like the apprenticeships at Highlands College. And so I want to say clearly, the apprenticeships at Highlands College are extraordinarily successful and they are working very, very well. I would also add, sir, and I'll add it at this point, it might be in my speech again, but repetition doesn't help, doesn't hurt. So in response to the report that the Deputy referred to about higher education, Highlands received recurring funding of £900,000 from recommendation 2 of that report towards delivering training. So that gap in funding was identified and was addressed. So I will say as well that we have to be very careful with what we wish for. I know that as a head of science, I used to fund science probably at a higher level than other subjects that were simpler because it was more expensive to fund science. That is true in any institution. And if we adopt a sort of zero-based budgeting approach for apprenticeships and other courses up at Highlands, we are at risk of losing some of those courses because they will not wipe their feet. I think, is that the phrase, sir? Wipe their feet? I think it is. Wipe their face. That's it. Thank you for the signifying wipe their feet. Face, I said it again. They will not wipe their face, and so we end up with a very divided approach. And the notion that because some money is diverted from some areas of the college to apprenticeships is the problem of funding elsewhere. It simply demonstrates a lack of understanding of the way these institutions work and the complexity of a multi-million-pound institution delivering education for thousands of students all of the time. And that is a real issue that we have to address. If Highlands College, as an institution, want to change their funding model, we will talk about that and we will come up with the best funding model. And that's an effective way to do it. It does not specify this proposition, sir, the type of education or restricted provision for publicly funded schools. Estimated costs only relate to apprenticeships, and I reiterate that we vote on the wording of the proposition. We are not here today to vote on what ifs and maybes. It's the wording of the proposition and the implications of that wording. And we have to think very carefully about what you are doing when you do that. People already mentioned about paid private schools. Trying to carve out a specific set of courses does not work. School and college funding enables the school leaders to have flexibility for their provision. Having said that, sir, in order to target, and the lifelong learning remit is very important to me, one of the actions that are already being taken with the help of the Social Security Minister is to remove the critical skills list from Social Security law and give me, if you like, control over that critical skills list in conjunction with the Economic Department to actually identify what skills and what training is needed on this island long term. In that way, we can direct the extra funding that comes from the CSP commitment that I made to lifelong learning towards that training to improve where we are in the island and to improve provision on this island. These propositions stand in the way of that with a simplified view of the way in which we fund. We need to be more intelligent in what we're funding. We need to be more intelligent in the way we address that funding. And I urge members to consider that point alone and reject this proposition to begin with. And so, is age-related entitlement the best approach? What if a student is ill until they're 19 years of age? It's a serious issue, and the reason why the additional lifelong learning remit. What about people who are older than 16? Are they not going to receive any sort of funding for courses? Because that might be the only way in which we retain the people that we want to. Earlier today, sir, I answered a question about nurseries, and I'm trying to encourage people who are not so young, I'm not going to use the O word, not so young, to perhaps return to the workforce and train in a particular way. This type of proposition that directs significant amounts of funding undefined, sir. No idea how much this is going to cost. I'd say to members, please be careful on what you're voting on. You're voting for a blank cheque, which I simply don't have, and that will get in the way of that change that we desperately need. So there's another implication of this. So it should be a target attainment level. It said, this is exactly what we're developing. Let's make sure we draw everybody's attainment level and ability level up to what is needed for the island and what enables people to really succeed in life. So apprenticeships are paid. Students are able to learn while they're studying. A-levels are full-time. Students are not able to learn while they're studying, apart from part-time jobs, and many of them do those. So we are comparing like with like, sir. And I think that's a very important point. And I would say that, yes, there are, I think, one of the issues about charging for apprenticeships. So the charges for apprenticeships for some employers, they are very low, about £20 a week in order to access that education. I don't know if anyone in this assembly still has managed to get training for £20 a week, because I haven't. And the effectiveness of that training is quite important. Also, some employers are quite happy to pay that because they can say to their employees, I'm paying for you to go to college, make sure you turn up for college and make sure you do well. Plus, there's the fact that we cover the cost of many of the exams and many of the assessments, which can be extremely expensive. And so the system that is in place is effective. Yes, we will make changes, but we will do that in a sustained, planned, considered and intelligent way that addresses the needs of this island so that we can have a long-term improvement to our workforce. And that's what I want to do as Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning. So, Part B requests me to additional funding in the government plan. So I can't really say which funding this will be from this proposition, because I have absolutely no idea how to cost it. It could be massively significant in the government plan. Also, sir, as we develop the government plan, which is happening at the moment, we're already looking at CSP priorities on lifelong learning. And I hope with that, and even the supporting of the minimum wage, some of that will go towards training. So there are many aspects that we are trying to develop which will address exactly this issue, not this simplified version. We're restructuring the skills into direct Highlands line management and the use of the excellent word to direct funding as to where it's best targeted. And it's a much more effective approach than the generic funding, which has already been put in place. And so I say again, I mentioned the thing about cross-funding in all educational establishments. And I say to anybody who has been involved in a large institution trying to deliver training, because there's very little profit in training, it's spend and its outcomes which are less tangible, more esoteric in the long term. There's a lovely word I managed to throw into my speech today. In the long term, sir, that you have to cross-fund within those organisations. I'll give you an example, sir. There was a period in the UK when the UK government were obsessed with changing qualifications. They thought they would change them just about every year. I personally think it's because the exam boards were making an absolute fortune out of it. And when it hit a subject within a school, that school had to have extra funding at that time in order to address that change. If there was no flexibility in the way that schools could fund, that course would have been lost, or they would not have been completing that course. Take away flexibility, you put institutions at risk. So the Independent School Funding Review recommendation addressed the levelling up of funding between vocational and academic education. This was subsequently referenced in the FE and Skills Actionable Agenda. That's the point I'm repeating, sir, but there's another point there. This has been implemented with £900,000 allocated to Highlands, the final tranche of which has just been allocated in the last few weeks and months. So that money has gone into education. We can also add the skill funds, now called a scheme. And I might be quite critical of the funding on that because it is not secured and it is not long term. And that's what we're trying to do, come up with a funding formula that works. So Part C, I'm going to finish soon because I know I've gone on for too long. But so it's very important to me that I cover all of the points I possibly can, particularly given the somewhat vehement assumptions that are being made about my role, which I hope I can convince people otherwise. And the last part is about the review of education legislation and policy with a view to increasing participation in education. Successive ministers have not addressed that. I've been through this before. I've answered questions on this, written questions, oral questions, to the scrutiny panel. I've given a very clear indication of what we're going to do, sir. We are going to make sure there is a sustainable approach to education, lifelong learning for every individual on this island. That's what we have to do in the long term. And then if we want to change the law to say up to 18, we can do that. It's not a problem. So, but there are nuances. I believe if you're on a Navy ship and you're only 16, 17, does that count as being in full-time education? Does apprenticeships count as being in full-time education? There are nuances that we have to address. It was also in ministerial plans 2 years ago, but wasn't acted upon. So, sir, we're currently looking at how changing the age of participation will best be implemented. Age-related or attainment-related, 1 year residency requirement, review of requirement to be living with parents or family member, immigration rules, who, what, where, and to whom is post-16 available for free. There are so many points that we are being addressing at the moment that officers are undertaking, all of which will be addressed at the appropriate time. Put simply, sir, we're already addressing Part C. So now I recognise, and I genuinely recognise, and I want to put this in the nicest possible way I can, and I recognise it's difficult to mid-term have change. I recognise that it's difficult mid-term to take on a role. But so I would urge the Assembly to reject this proposition, support me in the way where I want to move forward, support in the CSP priorities that I've made as Education Minister, support and have some faith in the idea that I am actually going to take these things forward. I'm very serious about taking these things forward, and the sustainable mechanism of funding is exactly what's going to happen. This proposition can be dangerous. It can be dangerous because it is undetermined. You'll be voting on something that is unsecured, is unsure, no idea where the money is coming from, no idea of the impact it's going to have, and will ride a coach and horses through the planning and the work that is going on in the department to really fundamentally address what we're doing in terms of learning beyond the age of 16. I urge members to reject this proposition, let me get on with the job, and then judge me on that in a year or so's time, and you're more than welcome to do that then. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy.